The title of the book is The Selector of Souls, and the title changes meaning as you go through the book. In the beginning, the Selector of Souls is a person. Later on, it's a technology, ultrasound. And at the end of the book, it's a person again. So the Selector of Souls has many meanings as you read the story. The story is about two women. It follows mainly the story of a Hindu midwife who does a terrible action in the beginning of the novel. And then that particular action haunts her and she has to balance her karma. The second person whose story is intertwined with the Hindu midwife is a novice nun, and her name is Anu, and she has to help Damini to balance her karma and change things so that both of them have to work together and overcome their differences, and that way we hope by the end of the novel girls and women will survive. Well, there are many different images that come to you as a writer. You sit and think about the different images, the different things that have been left undone, you know. And so the story of The Selector of Souls actually began from a short story that I wrote called A Pair of Ears. And that was published in 1996 in English Lessons and Other Stories. So I went back to that short story, moved it forward 10 years, and also realized that some of the characters were from What the Body Remembers. And in What the Body Remembers, which was my first novel, those characters were very small children. So what would they be like when they grew up? So a novel is always about what if this happens and what if that happens. And so I looked at all the different images and tried to connect them, and went to the short story and moved it forward, and then expanded the short story further out. At about halfway, I began to ask what this book was really about, and at that point I stepped back and realized that the terrible act that the Hindu midwife Damini does needed to come in the beginning, and then the whole book flowed better. So there's sometimes a reimagining, there's sometimes a restructuring of what you do, and that helps you to go forward. Well, I found that they came to me very, very whole. Damini's character was already created from the short story, A Pair of Ears. Anu's character was more difficult because she's perhaps closer to me in class and in education. And so I have to make her very individual. With Damini, because she's a maidservant, because she's from a Hindu background, I had less in common with her, so I have to really work towards understanding her. With Anu, I understood her, but I didn't feel she was unique enough, because she's like so many other bourgeois women that I know, you know. So I had to really work on making these people individuals and not, you know, representative of some particular group or caste or class or something. They are themselves, and that was what was very important to me. The story is set from 1994 to 1998, and it starts out in Delhi and it moves to the Shimla Hills, to about 4 miles west of Shimla, west of the Satluj, and it takes place in an imaginary town called Gurkot. And so that's one setting of the story, and the other setting of the story is Toronto. And there's a little girl who I saw in my mind growing up alone in Toronto, and I wanted to find out how she got there and to determine what would happen to her. And why was she growing up alone without her mother? And so that was how these two characters, Ranu and Chaitanya, are set in Toronto. Absolutely, prenatal selection became part of the story, but the main thing is sex selection is an expression of the discrimination against women. So this book really looks at all the different ways in which women have been and are discriminated against in the Indian environment. It also does a little bit of contrasting with the West, not necessarily favorably. So you can see from the workspace of women in Toronto, for example, that there are some similarities with the discrimination factor. So yeah, it is about sex selection, but it's only about sex selection because it is discussing all forms of discrimination against the different women characters as it goes along, because that's what these women experience. So it's not that it's set out to be about it, but it certainly has been inspired by the many things that women have to overcome in India in order to make their way through life. So I admire how people fight the things that they are faced with every day in terms of discrimination. And I think that this book is about some very amazing women. Language, of course, when you write a book in English, you reduce India to one language. And as you know, this is a multilingual society. So the challenge, of course, becomes to look at how we use language and then how that actually permeates our lives so that we think that things are normal when they're actually not. So the language influences our thinking also. And in the beginning of the book, it starts out with one of the characters realizing, for instance, that the word koi, the word someone, actually is only male. You cannot have someone who is female. And that is a problem with any gendered language. And most of the languages of India are gendered languages. So we're going to have to look at the gender of the gendered languages and change our way of looking at things. This is a period of rapid masculinization from the 1990s to 1998 when India went nuclear. That is why this book is set from 94 to 98. Okay, and you can see that the masculinization of the country, the son preference that led to daughter aversion, that led to sex selection, that led to the nuclearization, is a worldwide problem now. It's not just India's problem anymore. It is a problem that the whole world needs to address because there are two countries who are facing each other, armed with nuclear arms, and we need to do something about that.